Okay, picture this. You're a security researcher, and you've just found a digital skeleton key, a flaw that could unlock millions of doors. So you do the right thing, you report it, and just like that, a clock starts ticking. But here's the thing. You're not the only one who heard it start. You've just stepped into the crazy high-stakes race of vulnerability disclosure. And believe me, the finish line is moving faster than ever. Take a look at this number, 28.3%. This isn't just a statistic. It represents a fundamental change in how fast the game is being played. This is the speed at which a flaw you just found goes from being a potential problem to an active weapon in the wild. And no, this is not some theoretical what-if scenario. This is happening right now. Within just 24 hours of a vulnerability going public, attackers are already exploiting nearly a third of them. That's the new battlefield. Security teams are on the front lines, and the moment a new flaw is announced, they are facing an immediate 24-hour barrage. So in all of this chaos, how does anyone possibly keep track? How do we make sure that a researcher in Tokyo and a defense team in Toronto are talking about the exact same threat? Well, the answer lies in a system that acts as a universal translator, a kind of Rosetta Stone for digital security. It's called the CVE program, short for Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures. Honestly, the easiest way to think about it is like a universal dictionary for digital flaws. Every single vulnerability gets its own unique ID, like a fingerprint. That way, everyone, everywhere is on the exact same page. And I'm not the only one who sees it that way. As cybersecurity expert Carolyn Crandall put it, this system really is our Rosetta Stone. Without this shared language, any kind of coordinated defense would just fall apart. It would be total chaos, a digital Tower of Babel where everyone's shouting in a different language while attackers just waltz right through the confusion. And this, right here, is where the story takes a really critical turn. The very system that we built to create order is now facing its own major threats. So you have to ask, what happens when the Rosetta Stone itself starts to crack? The whole thing is way more fragile than you'd think. In 2025, the CVE program faced serious government funding issues, which sent alarm bells ringing through the entire industry. Without it, you'd have vendors making up their own names for things, and defenders would be stuck trying to figure out if 3 different alerts are for one problem or 3. And on top of all that, there's a growing coverage gap. Our official vulnerability database just can't keep up. And that brings us to our next critical number, 25.8%. This right here represents that coverage gap I was just talking about, and it's a gap that defenders are falling right into. Just let that sink in for a second. More than a quarter of the vulnerabilities being actively used by attackers were still sitting in a queue, waiting for an official analysis. For defenders on the ground, this means they're often flying completely blind, forced to rely on private, and usually pretty expensive, intelligence just to figure out what's coming at them. All right, so we have seen the big systemic risks to the system itself. Now let's zoom in and go to the front lines, to the modern battlefield where these vulnerabilities become actual weapons. You know, for years, the attacker's playbook was all about hitting desktop apps and browsers. But as this chart shows, the game has totally changed. The crosshairs are now aimed at the very backbone of the internet, the content management systems that run our websites, and the network edge devices that connect everything together. They're not just trying to pick the lock on your front door anymore. They're trying to take down the entire building. Here's a perfect example. A nasty flaw in Digiever network video recorders. These are common Internet of Things devices, and a lot of them are end of life, which is just a nice way of saying they don't get security updates anymore. This made them sitting ducks for botnets like Mirai, which could take them over completely. The threat got so bad, it actually triggered a major US government response. And this is what that response looks like. A hard deadline from CISA, the US cybersecurity agency. They basically ordered all federal agencies to either fix these devices, isolate them, or just get them off the network entirely. This is a real-time look at a national-level response to a critical threat. And the threat landscape is just so incredibly diverse. On one hand, you have a really surgical strike, like a specific server-side flaw that lets an attacker bleed sensitive data out of a network. And on the other, you have these massive, platform-wide updates, like Apple patching over 40 different holes at once. Defenders have to be ready for both the sniper and the shotgun. But here's the thing, vulnerabilities aren't just about code. In fact, probably the most persistent, most unpredictable vulnerability of all, well, it isn't in the software. It's us. It's the human factor. Just look at this data from the healthcare sector. When we hear insider threat, we usually picture some malicious employee trying to steal data. But the reality? It's actually a lot more boring and, frankly, a lot scarier. 61% of these breaches are just caused by simple human error, accidents, and negligence. And this is exactly the kind of weakness that sophisticated groups like lapse installers are experts at exploiting. I mean, why bother with complicated hacking when you can just bribe or trick an employee on the inside to give you the keys to the kingdom? And that whole idea of an insider goes way beyond a company's own employees, which brings us to our next absolutely staggering number, 94%. That's how many organizations give outside vendors access to their internal systems. Every single one of those connections is another potential doorway for an attacker. It completely blurs the lines of who's an insider and dramatically expands the area you have to defend. So, you've got a fractured system, exploits that move at the speed of light, and the completely unpredictable human elements. Given all that, what does the modern defense playbook even look like? How do you stay in this race? Well, a huge part of the answer is a shift in mindset called zero trust. You see, the old model of a secure castle with a big moat around it, that's obsolete. Zero trust starts with the assumption that threats are already inside the walls. It means limiting access, enforcing strict controls, and using multi-factor authentication everywhere. The mantra is simple but powerful: never trust, always verify. Modern defense also relies on a global network that shares intelligence. This data from the Scottish Cyber Coordination Center is a perfect example. By tracking vulnerability reports, they identified that Linux had the most reported flaws in late 2025. This kind of intelligence is priceless because it helps organizations figure out where to focus their energy and prioritize their defenses. So let's bring it all together. The pillars of modern defense are built on a foundation of coordinated disclosure where researchers and vendors work together. That's then amplified by federal mandates from agencies like CISA, which force everyone to take the most critical threats seriously. And it's all guided by a strategic shift in focus, away from individual desktops and toward protecting the internet's core infrastructure. Which really leaves us with one final and pretty unsettling question. We have the systems, we have the strategies, we have the intelligence. But in a world where the race between discovering a flaw and exploiting it is measured in hours, not days, is our global defense ecosystem really agile enough to keep up? Or are we just destined to always be one step behind?